What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to Versus. This is a series where I take two elements from a game that are similar, and I put them side by side, look at the stats of them to see which one is the best. In today's episode, we're going to be getting into the LMG category and covering the Bren versus the Stinger. Now these two LMGs are very similar. It's another one of those cases where when they added the Stinger, it was pretty clear that they based the stats directly off of the Bren stats, but they did make a few changes to make it unique. Starting it off with the damage profile, you can see that the damage profile is exactly the same for both of these. It's 50-40, which means they're always going to be a 2 to 3 shot kill, although I will mention with both of these LMGs, their ranges are so long that you will never find a line of sight long enough to reach that 3-shot kill range, and therefore as long as you're not shooting through cover, they're both always going to be a 2-shot kill. As for rate of fire, this is our first main difference between these two LMGs. The Bren has a rate of fire of 300 rounds per minute, whereas the Stinger has a very slightly faster rate of fire at 312 rounds per minute. This means our statistical minimum time to kill within that 2-shot kill range, which is all of the ranges like I said, is just 8 milliseconds faster with the Stinger, which realistically that isn't even a full frame, and therefore you're still killing your enemy on the exact same frame, assuming you're killing that enemy in 2 shots. What this essentially means is your realistic time to kill with both of these guns is identical. However, the Stinger is slightly more forgiving, so if you happen to be missing a few shots here and there, the Stinger will end up killing slightly faster than the Bren. Now the second difference, and possibly the biggest difference between these two guns, is going to be our aim down sight and our sprint out times. Our aim down sight time on the Bren is 380 milliseconds, whereas with the Stinger it is significantly slower at 550 milliseconds, which is extremely slow in Call of Duty. As for our sprint out time, the Bren has a 380 millisecond sprint out time, same as the same down sight time, whereas the Stinger is a little bit slower than that at 400 milliseconds. Now if you're constantly just posting up and sitting in one spot pre-aimed, these numbers don't really matter too much at all. If, however, you're trying to move around the map a little bit and you're not pre-aiming everything really effectively, the Stinger will definitely hold you back compared to the Bren. This brings us to Hipfire, which as you can see, the Stinger and the Bren are actually tied when it comes to Hipfire, but they are both the worst in the LMG category. As for recoil, keep in mind with these recoil tests, what I did is with the Stinger, I only fired 30 rounds, so we can properly compare the recoil plots between the Stinger and the Bren. And with the Bren, you can see here, it's got almost no side-to-side sway at all. It is purely vertical recoil, very little kick as well, quite minimal, quite easy to control, not a big deal by any means. When we have a look at the Stinger though, it's even better than the Bren. It doesn't really have much of that vertical recoil. It's got a little tiny bit of vertical recoil, but aside from that, it is extremely accurate. It's one of the most accurate full auto guns in the entire game. So in this area, it's pretty clear that the Stinger beats the Bren, but at the same time, the Bren is extremely accurate, and generally you're going to have no issues whatsoever with recoil. I feel this is also a good time to point out the iron sights with both of these. In my opinion, the Stinger's iron sights are significantly better than the Bren's iron sights. With the Bren, especially if you're not using extended mags, you have that giant magazine that covers pretty much the entire right side of your screen, and it's very obstructive. Whereas with the Stinger, it's a bit of a large gun in front of you when you're aiming down sight, but it's not nearly as bad as the Bren. This brings us to the final stats we're going to be looking at today, and this has to do with our magazine capacity as well as our reload times. With the Bren, our standard magazine capacity is only 30 rounds with 60 in reserve, whereas with the Stinger, we get an 80 round magazine standard with 160 in reserve. So a very clear advantage to the Stinger in this area here, and one of the big upsides to using the Stinger over the Bren. As for extended mags, they're actually equal. They both get a 100 round magazine with 200 rounds in reserve, but the key here is it's not really necessary on the Stinger, whereas with the Bren, I would say that extended mags is a very important attachment to have, simply because the reload times are so long. With the Bren, we get a reload add time of 5.17 seconds, whereas with the Stinger, it's 5.19 seconds. Realistically, in-game, they may as well be completely identical. You're not going to notice that difference at all. So that pretty much covers all of the important stats between these two guns. Basically, any other stat you can find will be completely identical between these two LMGs, including things like movement speed. So overall, when you put these two guns side by side, I would say if you're playing the role that's intended by these guns, where you're sitting back, you're pre-aiming, and you're locking down lanes, the Stinger is clearly superior to the Bren. However, the Bren is a bit more forgiving when it comes to moving around the map, even though it doesn't really excel in that area anyways. Both of these guns are really designed for sitting back and locking down lanes. As a result, for their purpose, I would say the Stinger is clearly the better LMG compared to the Bren, but you just have to be extra careful when it comes to moving around the map and make sure you never get caught off guard without aiming down sight. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's episode of the Versus series. Of course, as always, I'd like to know in the comment section below, between these two LMGs, which one is your favorite and why? And also, I'd like to know what you'd like me to cover for the future episode of this Versus series. Keep in mind, I've already covered quite a few things. I will leave a link to the playlist down below, so make sure you check that out. I may have already covered something you were looking for. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.